In the heart of a scorching desert, a priceless treasure map vanishes from a locked trunk, sparking suspicion among an archaeological team. Miss Jane Marple, the sharp-eyed spinster from St. Mary Mead, steps into the fray, unraveling a web of motives: pride, ambition, heritage, and desperation. As secrets surface and tensions rise, she sets a clever trap to catch the thief, revealing a young worker's desperate dream. In just 30 seconds, dive into a tale of betrayal, redemption, and the timeless truths of human nature, where the real treasure lies not in gold, but in the hearts exposed under the desert stars. Chapter 1. The Desert Encampment. The sun hung low over the endless dunes, casting a golden haze across the encampment, where canvas tents fluttered like weary flags in the dry, whispering wind. Miss Jane Marple, far removed from the familiar hedgerows of St. Mary Mead, sat primly on a folding chair outside her modest tent, her knitting needles moving with the steady rhythm of a metronome. She had been invited to this remote archaeological dig by Sir Reginald Harrow's cousin, a vague acquaintance from a long-ago London tea party, who thought the old lady's sharp mind might find amusement in the desert's mysteries. Miss Marple, ever curious about the quirks of human nature, had accepted, though she suspected the invitation stemmed more from politeness than expectation. The expedition, nestled in a valley of shifting sands, pulsed with purpose. Its aim was to unearth the fabled treasure of the Desert Kings, rumored to lie hidden within the ruins of an ancient city lost to time. Sir Reginald Harrow, the expedition's financier, was a man of imposing presence, his broad shoulders and booming voice ill-suited to the delicate work of archaeology. His wealth, amassed through ventures less romantic than this one, fueled the dig, and his ambition was as palpable as the heat. Dr. Evelyn Carter, the archaeologist in charge, was his opposite, a wiry woman with a scholar's intensity, her spectacles glinting as she pored over charts and fragments of pottery. Tariq, the local guide, moved with the grace of one born to the desert, his dark eyes scanning the horizon as if reading secrets in the wind. And then there was Malik, a young worker whose quiet diligence stood out amid the camp's bustle, his hands deftly sifting through sand to reveal relics with a care that bordered on reverence. Miss Marple, her white hair tucked neatly beneath a wide-brimmed hat, observed them all from her vantage point. The camp was a microcosm of ambition and alliance, much like her village, though the stakes here were gilded with the promise of treasure. She noted the way Dr. Carter's fingers lingered on her notebook, as if guarding a private thought, the way Sir Reginald's laugh carried a touch too loud, masking some inner calculation, the way Tariq's gaze drifted to the dunes, not with longing but with purpose, and the way Malik, when no one watched, paused to study the ground, his expression unreadable. That evening, as the team gathered around a long table set beneath a canopy, the air grew thick with anticipation. The meal was simple: flatbreads, dates, and a spiced stew, but the conversation was rich with speculation. Dr. Carter, her voice crisp despite the day's fatigue, announced the day's triumph. From a locked trunk, she produced a fragile parchment, its edges curling like autumn leaves. The map, inked by hands long dead, traced a path through the ruins to the treasure's rumored resting place. The group leaned forward, their faces illuminated by the flickering lanterns. Sir Reginald's eyes gleamed with proprietary zeal, Tariq's lips tightened as if in silent judgment, and Malik's hands, resting on the table, clenched briefly before relaxing. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, saw it all. A map, she thought, is a dangerous thing when so many hearts want to follow it. As the night deepened, the camp settled into a restless quiet, broken only by the soft rustle of sand and the distant cry of a desert creature. Miss Marple retired to her tent, her knitting folded neatly beside her. She did not sleep at once, but sat, her mind as alert as ever, piecing together the evening's impressions. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned that greed and envy wore many masks, and here, in this alien landscape, she sensed those same forces at play. People, she murmured to herself, her needles resuming their gentle click, are much the same, whether under an English sky or a desert star. Chapter 2. The Vanishing Clue. The desert dawn broke with a deceptive gentleness, its rose-gold light spilling over the dunes to paint the encampment in hues of fleeting calm. Miss Jane Marple, awake before the others, sat outside her tent, her knitting untouched as she savored the cool air and the quiet hum of a world not yet stirred to chaos. Her sharp eyes, undimmed by age, traced the outlines of the camp, the orderly rows of canvas tents, the makeshift table still littered with last night's dishes, and the central marquee where Dr. Evelyn Carter's precious trunk held the expedition's greatest prize, or had until the night's unseen drama unfolded. The first cry came just as the sun crested the horizon. It was Sir Reginald Harrow, his voice a thunderclap that shattered the morning's peace. "The map! It's gone!" he bellowed, storming from Dr. Carter's tent with the archaeologist at his heels, her face ashen beneath her spectacles. The camp erupted into motion. Tariq, roused from his tent, scanned the sand for signs of intrusion, his movements swift and precise. Malik, already at work sifting a nearby trench, paused, his shovel still, as if the news had rooted him to the spot. Miss Marple, rising slowly from her chair, adjusted her shawl and approached the gathering knot of figures, her expression one of mild curiosity, though her mind was already turning like the gears of a well-oiled clock. Dr. Carter stood before her tent, clutching the empty trunk as if it might yield answers through sheer will. The lock, a sturdy brass affair, gleamed unblemished, its key still in her possession. "It was here last night," she said, her voice taut with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "I checked it myself after dinner, just before I turned in. No one could have touched it." Her hands trembled as she gestured to the trunk's interior, now bare save for a few scattered papers and a leather-bound notebook. Sir Reginald, pacing like a caged lion, muttered about rival expeditions and sabotage, his florid cheeks reddening with each step. "This is a disaster," he roared. "I've sunk a fortune into this dig, and now our only lead is gone." Tariq, kneeling at the tent's entrance, examined the ground with the intensity of a man reading scripture. "No tracks," he said at last, his voice low but firm. "The sand is undisturbed. No one approached this tent from outside." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. If no stranger had entered, the thief was among them. Miss Marple, standing at the edge of the group, noted the flicker of unease that passed between the four. Dr. Carter's defensive rigidity, Sir Reginald's bluster, Tariq's guarded calm, and Malik's silence, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if willing it to swallow him whole. The camp's workers, a small crew of local men, gathered at a distance, their murmurs a soft counterpoint to Sir Reginald's outbursts. Miss Marple, with her knack for hearing what was not said, caught fragments of their talk, superstitions about cursed treasures and restless spirits. She dismissed such notions, but the mood of the camp intrigued her. Fear, she knew, could unmask motives as surely as greed. She approached Dr. Carter, her demeanor as unassuming as a village spinster inquiring about a parish tea. "My dear," she said gently, "might you tell me exactly how you secured the map last night? Every detail helps, you know." Dr. Carter, still clutching the trunk, seemed startled by the old lady's interest, but complied. "After dinner, I returned to my tent," she began, her voice steadying as she recounted the routine. "The map was on the table, where I'd shown it to the team. I placed it in the trunk, locked it with this key." She held up a small brass key on a chain, "and hung the key around my neck, as I always do. I slept lightly, as one does in the desert, but heard nothing. This morning, when I opened the trunk to check my notes, the map was gone." Her eyes narrowed. "It's impossible. The lock wasn't forced, and no one else has a key." Miss Marple nodded, her face a mask of polite concern, though her mind catalogued the details with precision. An unforced lock, a key never out of possession, a tent undisturbed, yet the map was gone. She glanced at Sir Reginald, who had ceased pacing to interrogate Tariq. "You're the guide," he snapped. "You know every inch of this blasted desert. Could someone have slipped in under cover of darkness?" Tariq shook his head, his expression unreadable. "The desert hides nothing at night," he said. "The sand would tell if a stranger had come. And the dogs?" He gestured to the camp's 2 lean hounds, now dozing in the shade. "They would have barked." Malik, who had resumed his work as if to distance himself from the uproar, caught Miss Marple's eye. She noted the slight tremor in his hands as he sifted through the sand, a contrast to his usual dexterity. "Young man," she called softly, beckoning him over. Malik approached reluctantly, his dark eyes wary. "You were up early, I see," she said, her tone conversational. "Did you notice anything unusual last night, perhaps after the dinner?" Malik shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "I slept, ma'am. I heard nothing." But Miss Marple saw the way his gaze darted to Dr. Carter's tent, a fleeting glance that spoke louder than his words. The morning wore on, and the camp's initial shock gave way to a tense unease. Sir Reginald, his anger spent, retreated to his tent to draft telegrams demanding updates from his contacts in the city. Dr. Carter, with a dogged determination, began cataloging her remaining notes, as if work might restore order to her world. Tariq took to patrolling the camp's perimeter, his long strides carrying him to the dunes and back, his face a mask of concentration. Malik returned to his trench, his movements mechanical, though Miss Marple observed him pause now and then, his eyes scanning the camp as if searching for something, or someone. Over a makeshift luncheon of bread and cheese, the team convened to discuss the theft. Sir Reginald, his mood soured, proposed a rival expedition as the culprit. "There's that French team digging 50 miles north," he said, stabbing a finger at the air. "They've been sniffing around our permits for months. They'd kill for that map." Dr. Carter, her composure regained, dismissed the idea. "No one knew we had it," she countered. "I only revealed it last night, and we've had no visitors. It's more likely a mistake. Perhaps I misplaced it in my papers." But her voice lacked conviction, and Miss Marple noted the way. Her fingers tightened around her notebook, as if shielding it from further loss. Tariq offered another theory, his tone measured. "The desert has its own thieves," he said. "Not men, but the wind. A gust could have carried the map from an open tent. The suggestion was met with skepticism. Dr. Carter's tent had been sealed, and the map was locked away. But Tariq's words stirred a murmur among the workers, who exchanged glances and muttered about omens. Miss Marple, slicing her bread with care, found the idea intriguing, not for its plausibility, but for what it revealed about Tariq. A man who spoke of the wind as a thief, she thought, might know how to move as silently as one. Malik, eating apart from the group, said nothing, but Miss Marple watched him closely. His reticence, she knew, could mask either guilt or fear, and she recalled a young man in St. Mary Mead who had stolen a silver spoon not for its value, but to prove he could. People steal for many reasons, she mused aloud, her voice soft enough to go unnoticed by all but Tariq, who glanced at her with a flicker of curiosity. She smiled, her eyes crinkling, and returned to her meal, her thoughts already weaving a pattern from the morning's chaos. As the afternoon heat settled over the camp, Miss Marple retired to her tent, ostensibly to rest, but, in truth, to think. She spread her knitting across her lap, though her needles remained still. The theft, she reasoned, was no act of chance. The map's value lay not just in its promise of treasure, but in its power to shift loyalties and expose ambitions. Dr. Carter's obsession with her work made her an unlikely thief, yet her control over the map gave her opportunity. Sir Reginald's wealth and impatience suggested he might seize the prize for himself, but his ignorance of the map's details, evident when he misnamed a key landmark at dinner, cast doubt on his involvement. Tariq's knowledge of the desert made him a formidable suspect, capable of slipping in and out unseen, yet his apparent disdain for treasure puzzled her. And Malik, with his quiet dreams and nimble fingers, seemed the least likely yet the most capable of such a deft theft. She recalled the lock, unforced and intact. A duplicate key was possible, though Dr. Carter's vigilance made that unlikely. A picklock, then? Malik, she remembered, had been seen near the supply tent where tools, and perhaps a skeleton key, were stored. Tariq's late-night walks, mentioned by a worker in passing, placed him abroad when the camp slept. Sir Reginald, despite his brandy-soaked alibi, was known to sleepwalk, a detail his assistant had let slip during a casual chat. Each piece of the puzzle, Miss Marple thought, was like a stitch in her knitting. Alone, it meant little, but together, it formed a pattern. By evening, the camp's mood had soured further. The workers, wary of curses, whispered among themselves, and Dr. Carter's sharp commands did little to restore order. Sir Reginald, emerging from his tent, declared his intent to hire a private investigator from the city, a move Miss Marple found amusingly redundant. "Investigators," she murmured to herself, "are only as good as the questions they ask." She resolved to ask her own, beginning with the smallest details, the kind that others overlooked but that, in her experience, revealed the truth. As the stars emerged, Miss Marple sat by the campfire, her shawl draped over her shoulders, her knitting resumed. The camp was quieter now, but the tension lingered, a silent current beneath the surface. She watched Dr. Carter retire to her tent, her lantern casting long shadows. Tariq, returning from his patrol, paused to nod at her, his eyes unreadable. Malik, finishing his work, glanced once more at Dr. Carter's tent before disappearing into his own. Sir Reginald's snores echoed from his tent, a reminder of his presence even in sleep. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a rhythm as steady as her thoughts. The truth, she thought, is like a desert wind, elusive, but it leaves traces for those who know where to look. Chapter 3. The Archaeologist's Precision. The desert sun climbed higher, its relentless glare transforming the encampment into a shimmering mirage of canvas and sand. Miss Jane Marple, undaunted by the heat, sat in the scant shade of her tent, her knitting needles idle for once as she sipped a tepid cup of tea. The theft of the treasure map had cast a pall over the expedition, and the morning's bustle carried an undercurrent of suspicion that Miss Marple found as familiar as the gossip of St. Mary Mead. She had resolved to begin her inquiries with Dr. Evelyn Carter, whose meticulous nature and central role in the dig made her a natural starting point. People, Miss Marple knew, often revealed themselves most clearly when they believed themselves above suspicion. Dr. Carter's tent, a model of order amid the camp's controlled chaos, stood at the heart of the site. Its entrance was flanked by neatly stacked crates of artifacts, each labeled in her precise hand. Miss Marple approached with her usual air of harmless curiosity, her straw hat tilted against the sun. "Dr. Carter, my dear," she called softly, pausing at the tent's threshold. "Might I trouble you for a moment? I find this business of the map quite perplexing, and I thought you might shed some light." Dr. Carter, bent over a folding table cluttered with pottery shards and a leather-bound journal, looked up with a flicker of irritation that softened into weary politeness. "Miss Marple," she said, pushing her spectacles up her nose, "I'm afraid I've little to add to what I've already told everyone. The map was in my trunk, locked securely, and now it's gone. It's a blow to the expedition, but I'm trying to focus on what we can still accomplish." Her voice was crisp, but Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in her hands as she adjusted a shard, aligning it with unnecessary care. "Quite understandable," Miss Marple replied, settling onto a camp stool with an air of someone merely passing the time. "But it's the details that fascinate me, you know. In my village, we often find that the smallest things, a misplaced teacup, a forgotten letter, reveal the most. Could you tell me again how you handled the map that evening? Every step, if you don't mind?" Dr. Carter sighed, but the request seemed to anchor her, as if recounting the facts restored a measure of control. "Very well," she said, setting down her pen. "After dinner, I brought the map back to my tent. It was on the table during the meal, as you saw, and I was careful not to let it out of my sight. I placed it in the trunk." She gestured to the brass-bound box, now sitting forlornly in the corner, "and locked it with my key. I always keep the key on this chain." She touched the thin chain around her neck, from which hung the small brass key, its surface worn but sturdy. "I hung the chain on its usual hook by my cot, and I went to bed. I heard nothing unusual during the night, and when I opened the trunk this morning, the map was gone." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes bright with interest. "And the trunk was locked when you checked it this morning? No signs of tampering?" "None," Dr. Carter said firmly. "The lock was as I left it. I've checked it a dozen times since, thinking I must have missed something, but it's intact. It's maddening." Her voice rose slightly, betraying a crack in her usual composure. Miss Marple, ever attuned to such shifts, tilted her head. "Maddening indeed," she murmured. "And you're certain no one else could have accessed the key, perhaps while you slept, or during a moment's distraction?" Dr. Carter's lips tightened. "Impossible. I'm a light sleeper, and the key never leaves my person except when I hang it by my cot. The tent was closed, and I'd have heard anyone entering. Besides, who would dare? The map is my discovery, my life's work. Why would I let it slip away?" Her words carried a fierce pride, and Miss Marple noted the way her fingers curled protectively around her journal, as if it, too, might vanish. "Of course," Miss Marple said soothingly. "You've built your career on precision, haven't you? I've noticed how carefully you catalog everything, every shard, every note. It's quite remarkable." She paused, her tone as light as if she were discussing a neighbor's garden. "But such precision must make a loss like this particularly galling, almost as if someone wanted to undermine your authority, perhaps." Dr. Carter's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Miss Marple glimpsed a spark of suspicion, quickly veiled. "I don't deal in motives, Miss Marple," she said curtly. "I deal in facts, and the fact is the map is gone, and I intend to continue this dig with or without it." She turned back to her table, signaling the end of the conversation, but Miss Marple lingered, her gaze drifting to the trunk. "Might I see it?" she asked, her voice gentle but insistent. Dr. Carter hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside as Miss Marple approached the trunk. It was a sturdy piece, its brass fittings gleaming despite the desert dust. The lock, as Dr. Carter had said, showed no signs of force, no scratches, no dents. Miss Marple ran her fingers lightly over its surface, her touch as delicate as if she were examining lace. "A fine lock," she remarked. "And you say you checked it yesterday afternoon, before dinner?" "Doctor." Carter frowned, her brow furrowing as she thought back. "Yes, no, wait. I checked it at noon when I was organizing my notes. I didn't open it again until after dinner, when I put the map inside." Her voice faltered, a shadow of doubt crossing her face. Miss Marple nodded, as if the detail were of no consequence, but her mind seized on it. A gap of several hours, unaccounted for, when the trunk might have been vulnerable. "Thank you, my dear," she said, rising with a smile. "You've been most helpful." As she stepped back into the sunlight, Miss Marple's thoughts were already spinning. Dr. Carter's precision was her strength, but it could also be her blind spot. A woman so consumed by control might not notice a subtle intrusion, especially if it came from someone she trusted or underestimated. Miss Marple recalled a case in St. Mary Mead where a vicar's wife had lost a cherished brooch, only to find it had been taken by a trusted maid who knew her habits too well. "Habits," she murmured, "are a thief's best friend." She glanced across the camp, where Sir Reginald was berating a worker over a mislaid tool, his voice carrying like a foghorn. Tariq was nowhere to be seen, likely off on one of his solitary walks, while Malik worked steadily in his trench, his movements methodical, but his eyes darting toward Dr. Carter's tent now and then. Miss Marple made a mental note of this, her fingers itching for her knitting needles, though she left them in her tent. The day was young, and there were more threads to unravel. Returning to her chair, she considered Dr. Carter's position. The archaeologist's pride in her work was evident, but so was her isolation. She trusted no one fully, not even Sir Reginald, whose funding she depended on. Could she have hidden the map herself, perhaps to secure her place as the expedition's sole authority? The idea was plausible, but Miss Marple dismissed it for now. Dr. Carter's distress seemed genuine, and a woman of her temperament would not risk her reputation on such a gamble. Still, the unforced lock and the key's constant presence raised questions. If not Dr. Carter, then who had the skill, or the opportunity to open the trunk undetected. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. It was Tariq returning from the dunes, his face as unreadable as ever. "Miss Marple," he said, inclining his head, "you seem deep in thought. The map troubles you too?" His tone was polite, but there was a probing quality to his gaze, as if he were testing her. "Oh, I'm just an old woman with too much time to think," she replied, her smile disarming. "But I do wonder about that lock. It's so very clever, isn't it? Almost as if the thief knew exactly what they were doing." Tariq's eyes flickered, but he said nothing, merely nodding before moving on. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind adding another stitch to the pattern. Tariq's knowledge of the desert was matched by his ability to move unseen, a skill that could serve a thief as well as a guide. As the afternoon heat intensified, Miss Marple retreated to her tent, her mind alive with possibilities. Dr. Carter's precision, while admirable, had not protected the map. The lock, the key, the undisturbed tent, all pointed to a thief who knew the camp's rhythms and its weaknesses. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple had learned that the most obvious suspects were rarely the guilty ones, but they often held the key to the truth. Dr. Carter, she decided, was not the thief, but her habits and her blind spots had made the theft possible. The question now was who had exploited them, and why. She picked up her knitting at last, the familiar click of the needles steadying her thoughts. The camp outside buzzed with activity, but Miss Marple felt the first threads of understanding begin to form. People, she thought, are never quite as clever as they believe, and that, I find, is their undoing. Chapter 4. The Guide's Secrets. The desert stretched endlessly around the encampment, its dunes rippling under the midday sun like the waves of a petrified sea. Miss Jane Marple, ever resilient despite the heat, sat in the shade of a canvas awning, her knitting needles moving with a quiet rhythm that belied the sharpness of her thoughts. The theft of the treasure map had deepened the camp's unease, and Miss Marple, with her unerring instinct for human nature, turned her attention to Tariq, the local guide whose knowledge of the desert was as vast as it was enigmatic. In her village, she had known men like him, quiet, watchful types whose silence masked depths others rarely glimpsed. She sensed that Tariq's secrets, whatever they were, might hold the key to the map's disappearance. Tariq was a man of the desert, his lean frame and weathered face as much a part of the landscape as the dunes themselves. He moved with a grace that spoke of years navigating treacherous sands, and his dark eyes, sharp as a falcon's, seemed to see beyond the horizon. Miss Marple had observed him closely since her arrival, his habit of slipping away at dusk, his cryptic remarks about the land's history, and the way the camp's workers deferred to him as if he were more than a mere guide. Now, with the map gone, his reticence took on a new significance. She resolved to speak with him, knowing that a direct approach would yield little. Like the desert, Tariq required a subtler path. She found him near the edge of the camp, crouched beside a low ridge, examining the sand with an intensity that suggested he saw more than mere grains. "Mr. Tariq," she called, her voice light and unassuming, as if she were merely out for a stroll. "Might I join you? The desert is so vast, and I confess I know so little about it." She adjusted her shawl, her smile as disarming as a vicar's wife offering tea. Tariq rose, brushing sand from his hands, and regarded her with a polite nod. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice low and accented with the cadence of the region. "The desert is not for everyone, but you seem at ease here. What brings you to my corner of the camp?" His tone was courteous, but Miss Marple caught the faint wariness in his eyes, like a man accustomed to guarding his thoughts. "Oh, just an old woman's curiosity," she replied, settling onto a nearby crate with a sigh. "This business with the map has set everyone on edge, hasn't it? I was wondering what you made of it. You know these sands better than anyone, I'm told. If someone took the map, would they need your knowledge to follow it?" Her question was gentle, almost idle, but her eyes were keen, watching for any flicker of reaction. Tariq's expression remained impassive, though his fingers paused briefly in their task of tying a cord around a water flask. "The map is only lines on paper," he said at last. "Without the desert's truths, its hidden paths, its water, its dangers, it is nothing. A thief might take it, but they would not get far without a guide." His words carried a quiet conviction, and Miss Marple noted the pride beneath them, as if the desert were his alone to command. "Quite so," she agreed, her needles clicking softly as she resumed her knitting. "And you, of course, know those truths better than most. I've heard the workers speak of you with such respect, almost reverence. They say you know every ruin, every oasis, as if the desert itself whispers to you." She smiled, her tone as warm as if she were praising a neighbor's garden. "It must be tempting sometimes to keep such treasures to yourself." Tariq's eyes narrowed, but he met her gaze steadily. "The desert's treasures are not gold or jewels," he said. "They are stories, history, the bones of a people long gone. I guide to preserve, not to possess." His voice was firm, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting shadow in his expression, as if her words had stirred something he preferred to keep buried. She recalled his comment at dinner, when the map was unveiled. "Gold fades, but stories endure." It had struck her then as a rebuke, and now she wondered if it masked a deeper motive. "Preserving history is a noble calling," she said, her tone thoughtful. "But a map like that, well, it's a powerful thing, isn't it? It could tempt anyone, even someone who values stories over gold, perhaps someone who fears what others might do with such a treasure." She paused, letting the words settle, and watched as Tariq's hands stilled, his fingers tightening briefly on the flask. "The map is Dr. Carter's concern," he said, his voice measured. "My job is to lead the way, not to chase papers." He stood, signaling the end of their talk, but Miss Marple was not so easily dismissed. She rose with him, her movements slow but deliberate, and gestured toward the dunes. "I noticed you walk out there often," she said, as if the thought had just occurred to her. "Last night, after dinner, I saw your lantern moving toward the ridge. It must be peaceful, walking alone under the stars. Did you see anything unusual, perhaps? A stranger, or someone from the camp?" Her question was casual, but her eyes were sharp, catching the brief tightening of Tariq's jaw. "The desert is quiet at night," he said, his tone even. "I saw nothing but sand and stars." He turned to go, but Miss Marple's voice stopped him. "One more thing," she said, her smile unwavering. "The workers mentioned a story about a hidden path near here, one only a few know. You wouldn't happen to use such a path on your walks, would you? It might explain why you leave no tracks." Her words were light, but they landed like a pebble in still water, rippling across Tariq's composure. He turned back, his eyes searching hers for a moment, before he answered. "The desert has many paths," he said, but they are not for outsiders. I walk to clear my mind, nothing more. With that, he nodded and strode away, his silhouette blending into the dunes as if he belonged to them. Miss Marple returned to her chair, her knitting resumed, but her mind racing. Tariq's words were carefully chosen, but they revealed more than he intended. His disdain for the treasure, his solitary walks, his knowledge of hidden paths, all suggested a man who could move unseen, perhaps even into a locked tent. Yet his passion for the desert's history seemed genuine, and Miss Marple wondered if his motive might be protection rather than theft. In St. Mary Mead, she had known a gardener who hid rare bulbs, not to sell them, but to keep them safe from careless hands. Could Tariq see the map as a threat to his beloved desert, a lure for plunderers? She considered the logistics of the theft. The unforced lock on Dr. Carter's trunk suggested skill or access, and while Tariq had no key, his familiarity with the camp's routines made him a formidable suspect. He knew when Dr. Carter slept, when the dogs were fed, when the camp was quiet. His late-night walks, dismissed as habit, placed him abroad when the map vanished. Yet there was no evidence, no tracks, no witnesses, no map in his possession. Miss Marple knew that absence of evidence was not evidence of absence, but it complicated the puzzle. As the afternoon waned, she watched the camp from her vantage point. Dr. Carter was back at her table, her focus on her artifacts, as if denying the map's loss. Sir Reginald, his temper cooled, was dictating letters to his assistant, his voice carrying across the sand. Malik, ever diligent, worked in his trench, but Miss Marple noted his occasional glances toward Tariq, who was now conferring with a worker near the supply tent. The dynamic intrigued her, Malik's wariness, Tariq's authority, Dr. Carter's isolation, Sir Reginald's bluster. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but Tariq's secrets, she sensed, were a thread worth following. She recalled a detail from the morning, a worker's passing comment that Tariq had once guided a rival expedition, only to lead them astray when they sought to plunder a sacred site. The story, half whispered, suggested a man who placed heritage above profit. If Tariq saw the map as a threat to the desert's sanctity, might he have taken it to protect it? The idea was compelling, but Miss Marple cautioned herself against haste. Assumptions, she knew, were as dangerous as sandstorms. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of fire, Miss Marple tucked her knitting away and rose, her mind clear despite the desert's haze. Tariq was no ordinary guide, and his secrets were as layered as the dunes. She would watch him closely, for in his silences, she suspected, lay clues to the map's fate. People, she thought, her lips curving in a faint smile, hide their truths in plain sight, if only one knows where to look. Chapter 5. The Sponsor's Ambition. The desert afternoon pressed down on the encampment with a weight that seemed to thicken the air, turning every breath into a conscious effort. Miss Jane Marple, unperturbed by the oppressive heat, sat in her usual spot under the canvas awning, her knitting needles clicking with a steady cadence that mirrored the pulse of her thoughts. The theft of the treasure map had cast a long shadow over the expedition, and the camp's fragile harmony was fraying like an old rope. Having spoken with Dr. Carter and Tariq, Miss Marple now turned her attention to Sir Reginald Harrow, the expedition's financier, whose booming presence and boundless ambition made him a figure impossible to ignore. In St. Mary Mead, she had known men like him, wealthy, brash, and often blind to their own vulnerabilities. She suspected that Sir Reginald's motives, like his voice, carried further than he intended. Sir Reginald's tent was a monument to excess, its canvas walls adorned with silk hangings, and its interior cluttered with luxuries ill-suited to the desert, a mahogany camp table, a silver decanter, and a gramophone that sat silent under a layer of dust. Miss Marple found him there, sprawled in a folding chair, a glass of brandy in hand despite the hour. His assistant, a nervous young man named Perkins, hovered nearby, scribbling notes as Sir Reginald dictated a letter to his investors. "Tell them we're on the verge of greatness," he thundered, his face flushed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "This setback is nothing, a mere hiccup." He caught sight of Miss Marple at the tent's entrance and waved her in with a theatrical flourish. "Miss Marple, come, join me. A spot of brandy to beat this infernal heat?" Miss Marple smiled, declining the offer with a gentle shake of her head as she settled onto a cushioned stool. "You're very kind, Sir Reginald," she said, her voice as soft as a summer breeze. "But I find tea suits me better in such weather. I've come to talk about this dreadful business with the map. It must be terribly vexing for you, having invested so much in this venture." Her tone was sympathetic, but her eyes were sharp, noting the way his hand tightened around his glass at the mention of the map. "Vexing doesn't begin to cover it," he growled, setting the glass down with a thud. "I've poured a fortune into this dig, more than Carter or that guide could dream of. That map was our ticket to glory, and now it's gone. Poof, like smoke in the wind." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Mark my words, it's those French devils up north. They've been eyeing our permits, sniffing around like vultures. I wouldn't put it past them to send a spy." His voice rose, carrying across the camp, and Miss Marple noted Perkins wince, as if accustomed to such outbursts. "An intriguing theory," she said, her knitting resuming its quiet rhythm. "But Dr. Carter mentioned the map was only revealed at dinner, and no strangers have been seen near the camp. It does make one wonder if the thief was closer to home, doesn't it?" Her question was posed with the innocence of a village gossip, but it landed like a dart. Sir Reginald's bluster faltered, and he took a quick sip of brandy, his eyes darting to Perkins, who busied himself with his notes. "Nonsense," Sir Reginald said, recovering his swagger. "I was with Perkins all evening, drinking and planning until midnight. Couldn't have been me, if that's what you're hinting at." He chuckled, but it was a hollow sound, and Miss Marple noted the way. His fingers drummed on the table, a restless habit that betrayed his unease. "Besides," he added, "why would I steal my own map? I'm here for the treasure, same as Carter. More even, I want my name in the history books." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite agreement. "Of course, Sir Reginald. Your passion for this expedition is clear to everyone. I noticed at dinner how you spoke of the treasure with such enthusiasm. Though I did wonder about something you said, a small thing, really. You mentioned the map leading to the tomb of the 3 kings, but Dr. Carter called it the Vault of the Desert Lords. A curious slip, don't you think?" Her tone was light, but her eyes held his, and she saw a flicker of discomfort cross his face. "Did I?" he said, waving a hand dismissively. "All these ancient names sound the same to me. Point is, that map's the key to everything, and I'll be damned if I let some thief ruin my legacy." He leaned back, his chair creaking under his weight, and Miss Marple smiled, her needles never pausing. The slip, she knew, was no mere mistake. Sir Reginald's ignorance of the map's details suggested he hadn't studied it closely, or perhaps he wanted to appear as if he hadn't. In her village, she had known a pompous squire who feigned ignorance to hide his meddling, and she wondered if Sir Reginald's bluster served a similar purpose. "Forgive my curiosity," she said, her voice as gentle as ever. "But you mentioned being with Mr. Perkins until midnight, a late night for such a busy man. Did you retire directly afterward, or perhaps take a stroll to clear your head? The desert air can be so refreshing, I'm told." Her question was innocuous, but she watched him closely, noting the way Perkins glanced up from his notes, his pen hesitating. "Straight to bed," Sir Reginald said firmly. "Drank a bit too much, truth be told, slept like a log." But Perkins, catching Miss Marple's eye, cleared his throat nervously. "Well, sir," he ventured, "you did step out briefly around 11. Said you needed air. I stayed in the tent, organizing your papers." Sir Reginald shot him a look that could have curdled milk, but Perkins pressed on, his voice faltering. "You weren't gone long, 10 minutes maybe." Miss Marple's smile widened, though her eyes remained sharp. 10 minutes, she said thoughtfully. "Not long, but enough for a quick walk. Did you happen to pass, Doctor? Carter's tent, Sir Reginald? It's so close to yours, after all." Her tone was as mild as if she were asking about the weather, but the question hung in the air, heavy with implication. "Didn't go near it," Sir Reginald snapped, his face reddening. "I wandered toward the dunes, if you must know, needed to stretch my legs, saw nothing, heard nothing. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got letters to finish." He turned to Perkins, dismissing Miss Marple with a wave, but she lingered, her knitting needles pausing as she considered his words. As she stepped back into the sunlight, Miss Marple's mind was alive with possibilities. Sir Reginald's ambition was as clear as the desert sky, but his alibi, while plausible, had cracks. His brief absence from the tent, confirmed by Perkins, placed him abroad at a critical time. His ignorance of the map's details could be genuine, or a calculated pretense to deflect suspicion. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead merchant, who had orchestrated a theft to boost his own prestige, and she wondered if Sir Reginald, hungry for glory, might have taken the map to ensure the treasure bore his name alone. Yet the unforced lock on Dr. Carter's trunk puzzled her. Sir Reginald, with his heavy hands and heavier ego, seemed an unlikely candidate for such finesse. She glanced across the camp, where Dr. Carter was cataloging artifacts with her usual precision, her face set in a mask of determination. Tariq was leading a group of workers to a new trench, his commands calm but authoritative. Malik, as ever, worked alone, his shovel moving rhythmically, though Miss Marple noted the way. His eyes flicked toward Sir Reginald's tent, a fleeting glance that spoke of wariness, or perhaps resentment. The camp was a web of motives, and Sir Reginald's ambition, she sensed, was a thread that pulled at them all. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the sand, Miss Marple returned to her chair, her knitting resumed, but her thoughts far from idle. Sir Reginald's bluster, like the desert wind, covered more than it revealed. She would need to watch him, to listen for the truths hidden in his boasts. "Ambition," she murmured, her needles clicking softly, "is a fire that burns brightly, but it often blinds the one who carries it." Chapter 6. The Workers' Silence. The desert evening settled over the encampment with a hush that seemed to amplify the smallest sounds, the creak of a tent flap, the distant yip of a desert fox, the soft clink of Miss Jane Marple's knitting needles as she sat by her tent, her eyes scanning the fading light. The theft of the treasure map had tightened the camp's nerves like a drawn bowstring, and Miss Marple, with her quiet knack for seeing through the veils people draped over their truths, turned her attention to Malik, the young worker whose silence stood out amid the camp's clamor. In St. Mary Mead, she had known boys like him, unassuming, overlooked, yet often carrying dreams too heavy for their slight frames. She suspected that Malik's reticence, like a still pond, hid depths worth exploring. Malik was at his usual post, a shallow trench at the camp's edge, where he sifted sand with a care that bordered on reverence. His movements were precise, almost delicate, as he brushed away layers of earth to reveal fragments of pottery or bone, each handled as if it were a sacred relic. Miss Marple watched him from a distance, noting the way he kept apart from the other workers, his head bowed, his eyes rarely meeting theirs. There was a humility in him, but also a watchfulness, as if he were guarding something more than his work. She approached slowly, her steps soft on the sand, her shawl draped lightly against the evening chill. "Good evening, Malik," she said, her voice as gentle as a breeze. "You work so diligently, even with all this fuss about the map. It's quite admirable, you know." She smiled, settling onto a nearby crate, her knitting in her lap like an old friend. Malik paused, his shovel still, and glanced up, his dark eyes wary but not unkind. "Thank you, ma'am," he said softly, his voice barely carrying over the whisper of the wind. "It's just my job." Miss Marple nodded, her needles beginning their familiar dance. "Oh, but it's more than that, isn't it?" she said, her tone conversational, as if they were chatting over tea in her village parlor. "I've seen how carefully you handle those artifacts. It's almost as if you understand their stories. In my village, we had a lad who tended the churchyard, always so gentle with the old stones. He said they spoke to him, in their way. Do you ever feel that, working here?" Her question was light, but her eyes were keen, watching for any ripple in his composure. Malik hesitated, his fingers tightening briefly on the shovel's handle. "The desert has stories," he said at last, his voice low. "But I just dig. The stories are for Dr. Carter." He resumed his work, his movements deliberate, but Miss Marple noted the slight flush in his cheeks, a sign that her words had touched a nerve. She leaned forward, her smile unwavering. "Of course," she said, "but a young man like you, with such skillful hands, must have dreams of his own. This treasure everyone's talking about. It must stir the imagination, don't you think? A map leading to riches, hidden for centuries. It's the sort of thing that could change a life." Her tone was musing, almost wistful, but her words were a gentle probe, testing the waters of his silence. Malik's shovel paused again, and for a moment his eyes met hers, a flicker of something. Hunger, perhaps, or fear, passing across his face before he looked away. "I don't think about treasures," he said, his voice flat. "I move dirt. That's enough." But Miss Marple saw the way. His shoulders tensed, the way his gaze darted toward Dr. Carter's tent, now glowing faintly with lantern light. It was a small thing, but in her experience, small things often led to larger truths. She shifted tack, her voice as soft as ever. "You were up early this morning, weren't you? I saw you working before the alarm about the map. Did you notice anything odd last night? Perhaps after dinner? A sound? A shadow? In my village, the quiet ones often see what others miss. Her question was casual, but her eyes held his, searching for the truth behind his reserve. Malik shook his head, his expression closing like a door. "I slept, ma'am. I heard nothing." But Miss Marple caught the slight tremor in his voice, the way his fingers brushed the edge of his tunic, as if seeking reassurance. She recalled a saint. Mary Mead boy who had stolen a silver candlestick from the vicarage, not for profit, but to prove he could escape his small life. Malik's silence, she thought, might mask a similar longing, a dream of something beyond the trench he dug each day. "You're very modest," she said, her smile warm. "But I've noticed how the others rely on you. Even Tariq speaks highly of your work, and he's not one for praise. Were you near Doctor Carter's tent yesterday, perhaps fetching tools? It's so close to the supply tent, after all." Her question was posed with the innocence of an elderly aunt, but it was precise, aimed at the gap between Malik's words and his actions. Malik's eyes flickered, and for a moment he seemed to weigh his response. "I was at the supply tent in the afternoon," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Needed a new brush, but I didn't go near Dr. Carter's tent. I don't meddle where I don't belong." His words were firm, but Miss Marple noted the way. His gaze dropped to the sand, as if avoiding her scrutiny. "Of course," she said, her tone soothing. "You're a hard worker, Malik, and that's a rare thing. But if you did see something, even something small, it might help. A map like that, it's not just paper, is it? It's hope, for some." She paused, letting the words settle, and watched as Malik's hands stilled, his shovel resting against the trench's edge. He said nothing, but the silence was heavy, and Miss Marple knew she had stirred something within him. As she rose to leave, she glanced at his tent, a small, weathered structure at the camp's edge. Unlike the others, it was bare of personal touches. No photographs, no trinkets, only a neatly rolled mat and a single lantern. But Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught a faint irregularity, a corner of cloth protruding from beneath the mat, too clean to be part of the desert's dust. It was a small thing, but in her experience, small things were often the key to unlocking secrets. She returned to her chair as the stars began to prick the sky. Her knitting resumed, but her mind far from idle. Malik's silence was not mere shyness, she decided. It was a shield, protecting something, perhaps a dream, perhaps a guilt. The supply tent, so close to Dr. Carter's, offered opportunity, and his skillful hands suggested the ability to pick a lock if he had access to the right tools. Yet his reticence puzzled her. If he had taken the map, was it for wealth or for something deeper? A chance to break free from the life that bound him. Miss Marple thought of Dr. Carter's unforced lock, of Tariq's unseen walks, of Sir Reginald's restless ambition. Each had their motives, but Malik's silence stood out, a quiet note in a noisy score. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead girl who had hidden a stolen locket, not to sell it, but to hold on to a dream of something better. "Dreams," Miss Marple murmured, her needles clicking softly, "can be as dangerous as greed, especially when they're silent." Chapter 7. A Pattern in the Sand. The desert night enveloped the encampment in a velvet hush, broken only by the faint crackle of the campfire and the occasional rustle of wind across the dunes. Miss Jane Marple sat by her tent, her knitting needles still, her eyes fixed on the stars that glittered like scattered diamonds above. The theft of the treasure map had woven a web of suspicion around the camp, and Miss Marple, with her quiet genius for untangling human motives, felt the threads of the mystery beginning to converge. Her conversations with Dr. Carter, Tariq, Sir Reginald, and Malik had each revealed a facet of the puzzle, and now, like the patterns in her knitting, she sought to weave them into a coherent whole. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned that truths often lay in the overlooked details, the pause in a voice, the flicker of a glance, the misplaced object. And here, in this alien landscape, the principle held true. The camp's morale had deteriorated since the map's disappearance. Dr. Carter, though, steadfast in her work, snapped at the workers with a sharpness that betrayed her strain. Sir Reginald's bluster had given way to brooding, his tent a fortress of muttered plans and brandy fumes. Tariq's solitary walks grew longer, his absence noted by the workers who whispered of his uncanny knack for vanishing into the dunes. Malik, ever silent, worked with a dogged intensity, but Miss Marple had seen his eyes linger on the others, as if weighing their suspicions against his own secrets. The camp, she thought, was like a village on edge, each person guarding their own truths, while casting doubt on their neighbors. Miss Marple's mind returned to the facts of the theft. The map had vanished from Dr. Carter's locked trunk, the lock unforced, the tent undisturbed. Dr. Carter's key, worn on a chain around her neck, had not left her possession, yet she had admitted to not checking the trunk since noon on the day before the theft, a window of opportunity that Miss Marple found significant. Sir Reginald, despite his brandy-soaked alibi, had wandered briefly that night, his sleepwalking a curious detail that Perkins, his assistant, had hesitantly confirmed. Tariq's late-night walks placed him abroad when the camp slept, his knowledge of hidden paths suggesting a means to move unseen. And Malik, with his deft hands and proximity to the supply tent, had both opportunity and skill, if not an obvious motive. She considered the lock again, its unblemished surface a riddle in itself. A duplicate key was unlikely. Dr. Carter's vigilance made that improbable, but a picked lock was possible, especially for someone with access to tools. The supply tent, where Malik had been seen fetching a brush, held an array of implements, including wire and small picks that could serve a thief with nimble fingers. Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead burglary, where a lad had used a bent hairpin to open a locked drawer, his skill honed by necessity rather than malice. Malik, she thought, might have such skill, born of his meticulous work with artifacts. Tariq's walks intrigued her most. The workers' tales of his ability to leave no tracks suggested a man who could slip into Dr. Carter's tent unnoticed, but his motive remained elusive. His disdain for treasure, his reverence for the desert's history, could these mask a desire to protect the ruins from plunder? Miss Marple thought of a saint, Mary Mead Gardner, who had hidden rare seeds to save them from a careless landlord. Tariq, she mused, might see the map as a threat to his heritage, a lure for those who valued gold over legacy. Sir Reginald's ambition, meanwhile, was a blazing thread in the pattern. His brief absence from his tent, his misnaming of the map's destination, his hunger for glory, all pointed to a man who might act rashly to secure his place in history. Yet his lack of finesse made him an unlikely thief for so delicate a crime. Miss Marple wondered if his sleepwalking, mentioned by Perkins, might have led him to the trunk in a daze, though the unforced lock argued against such a clumsy act. Malik's tent, however, held her attention. The scrap of cloth she had glimpsed beneath his mat, too clean to be ancient, nagged at her. It was a small thing, but in her experience, small things were often the key. She resolved to keep a closer eye on Malik, whose silence, she sensed, was not mere shyness, but a shield for something deeper. Perhaps a dream of escape, perhaps a guilty act. As the campfire dwindled, Miss Marple rose, her shawl drawn tight against the night's chill. She walked slowly toward the center of the camp, her eyes scanning the tents, now glowing faintly with lantern light. Dr. Carter's tent was closed, but a shadow moved within, suggesting the archaeologist was still awake, perhaps poring over her notes. Tariq's tent was dark, his absence confirming another of his nocturnal walks. Sir Reginald's snores rumbled through the canvas, a steady rhythm that belied his restless nature. Malik's tent, at the camp's edge, was lit by a single lantern, its glow casting a faint halo on the sand. Miss Marple paused near the supply tent, her gaze lingering on its contents: shovels, brushes, coils of rope, and a small box of tools that gleamed in the moonlight. She stepped closer, her movements as unobtrusive as a shadow, and peered inside. Among the tools was a thin metal pick, its tip fine enough to probe a lock. She made no move to touch it, but her mind catalogued the detail, another stitch in the pattern. "Opportunity," she murmured, "is a thief's first friend." Returning to her tent, she sat once more, her knitting resumed as a cover for her thoughts. The camp was a tapestry of motives: pride, heritage, glory, desperation, and each suspect held a thread. Dr. Carter's precision made her a gatekeeper, but not a thief. Tariq's secrets suggested a protector, not a plunderer. Sir Reginald's ambition burned too brightly to be subtle. Malik, with his silent dreams and skillful hands, was the enigma, his reticence a canvas for possibilities. The cloth in his tent, the tools in the supply tent, the unforced lock, all pointed to a thief who knew the camp's rhythms and exploited its blind spots. Miss Marple thought of a St. Mary Mead mystery, where a stolen locket had been hidden in plain sight, its thief betrayed by a single careless glance. Here, the map was hidden, but its absence was a presence, pulling at the camp's fragile bonds. She leaned back, her needles clicking softly, and let her mind trace the pattern. The truth, she thought, is like the desert sand. It shifts, but it always leaves a mark. Chapter 8. The Trap of Greed. The desert night was a tapestry of shadows, its silence broken only by the faint crackle of the dying campfire and the occasional sigh of wind across the dunes. Miss Jane Marple sat in her tent, her knitting folded neatly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the sliver of moonlight that slipped through the canvas flap. The theft of the treasure map had woven a net of suspicion around the encampment, and Miss Marple, with her quiet genius for unraveling human folly, felt the strands of the mystery drawing tighter. Her observations of Dr. Carter's precision, Tariq's secrets, Sir Reginald's ambition, and Malik's silence had each added a thread to the pattern, and now she sensed the moment was ripe for a bolder move. In St. Mary Mead, she had often found that a well-placed nudge could reveal what careful questioning could not, and she resolved to set a trap to catch the thief. The idea had come to her as she sat by the campfire the previous evening, watching the camp's uneasy rhythm. The map's absence had left a void, but Miss Marple knew that greed, like a moth to a flame, was drawn to the promise of treasure. She proposed her plan to Dr. Carter at breakfast, her tone as mild as if she were suggesting a village fete. "My dear," she said, stirring her tea, What if we were to announce a new clue, a second map, perhaps, or a sketch of the original? If the thief believes we've another path to the treasure, they might act, and we might catch them in the act. Dr. Carter, her face etched with fatigue, looked skeptical, her fingers tightening around her notebook. "A false map?" she said, her voice sharp. "It's risky, Miss Marple. If word gets out, it could attract more trouble, rival expeditions, even bandits." But Miss Marple's gentle insistence, coupled with her disarming smile, wore down the archaeologist's resistance. "Very well, Doctor," Carter said at last, "but it must be convincing. I'll draw a sketch myself, based on my notes. We'll say it's a copy I made before the map was stolen." Sir Reginald, overhearing the plan, seized upon it with his usual gusto. "Capital idea," he boomed, his brandy glass raised as if toasting a victory. "We'll flush the blighter out. Put the sketch in a locked box, Carter, and I'll keep watch myself." Miss Marple noted his enthusiasm, wondering if it stemmed from a desire to catch the thief, or to prove his own innocence. Tariq, when informed, merely nodded, his dark eyes unreadable, though Miss Marple caught a flicker of amusement, as if he saw through the ruse. Malik, standing at the edge of the group, said nothing, but his gaze lingered on Dr. Carter's tent, a shadow crossing his face. The trap was set by midday. Dr. Carter, with her meticulous hand, crafted a convincing sketch, a parchment marked with cryptic symbols and a winding path that mimicked the lost map's style. She placed it in a small metal box, secured with a padlock, and announced its existence to the camp during lunch, her voice carrying a note of forced confidence. "I made a copy of the map's key details," she said, holding up the box for all to see. "It's not the original, but it's enough to guide us. I'll keep it locked in my tent as before." The workers murmured, their eyes wide with curiosity, while Sir Reginald clapped his hands, declaring the expedition back on track. Tariq's lips twitched, and Malik's hands stilled, his shovel resting in the sand. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, watched the reactions with care. The bait was laid, and now she needed only to wait. She retired to her tent, positioning her chair to afford a clear view of Dr. Carter's tent through a gap in the canvas. The camp settled into its evening routine, but the air was charged, as if the desert itself sensed the impending drama. Sir Reginald, true to his word, stationed himself near Dr. Carter's tent, his lantern casting a warm glow as he puffed on a cigar. Tariq, after a brief patrol, vanished into the dunes, his absence noted by Miss Marple with a raised eyebrow. Malik worked late, his silhouette moving in the trench until the last light faded. As midnight approached, Miss Marple's vigil grew sharper. Her eyes, accustomed to the dark, caught a flicker of movement near Dr. Carter's tent. A figure, cloaked in shadow, moved with a stealth that belied the camp's stillness. It was Malek, his slight frame unmistakable, as he crept toward the tent. Miss Marple's heart quickened, not with surprise, but with a quiet sorrow, for she had suspected his desperation from the start. He knelt by the box, his hands moving with a practiced grace, a thin tool glinting in the moonlight as he worked the padlock. Within moments, it clicked open, and he withdrew the sketch, tucking it into his tunic before slipping back into the darkness. Miss Marple waited, her knitting untouched, until Malik's lantern flickered out in his tent. She rose, her movements slow but deliberate, and made her way to Dr. Carter's tent, where Sir Reginald, dozing in his chair, stirred at her approach. "Sir Reginald," she whispered, her voice urgent but calm. "We must act quickly. The thief has taken the bait." She explained what she had seen, and Sir Reginald, his drowsiness banished, summoned Dr. Carter and Tariq, who appeared from the dunes as if summoned by the desert itself. The group converged on Malik's tent, their lanterns casting stark shadows on the canvas. Dr. Carter, her face a mask of fury, called Malik out, and the young man emerged, his eyes wide with fear but his jaw set. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice trembling. Miss Marple, standing quietly to the side, spoke softly. "Malik, my dear, we know you took the sketch. It was a trap, you see, a test to find the thief. Will you show us what's in your tunic?" Malik's shoulders sagged, and he reached into his tunic, producing the sketch with a shaking hand. I didn't mean harm," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I just wanted to see it, to know if it was real." But Miss Marple, her eyes gentle but unyielding, shook her head. "And the real map, Malik? Is it in your tent, perhaps under the mat where I saw that scrap of cloth?" Her words, soft as they were, struck like a hammer, and Malik's face crumpled. He led them to his tent, lifting the mat to reveal the original map, carefully wrapped in a clean cloth. The camp fell silent, the weight of his betrayal settling over them like dust. Dr. Carter's eyes blazed, but Miss Marple raised a hand, her voice steady. "Let us hear him out," she said. "In my village, I found that even thieves have their reasons." Malik's story spilled out in halting words, a tale of poverty, of a family trapped in a cycle of want, of a dream to use the treasure not for wealth, but for freedom. "I thought, if I could find it first, I could change everything," he said, tears streaking his face. Miss Marple listened, her heart heavy, for she had seen such desperation before, in the eyes of a St. Mary Mead boy who stole to feed his siblings. Greed, she thought, is a cruel trap, but hope can be crueler still. Chapter 9. The Confession. The desert dawn broke with a quiet ferocity, its pale light creeping over the dunes to illuminate the encampment in a cold, unyielding glow. Miss Jane Marple stood at the edge of the gathering, her shawl drawn tightly against the morning chill, her eyes fixed on Malik as he stood before the assembled team, the stolen map clutched in Dr. Carter's trembling hands. The trap had sprung, revealing the young worker as the thief, and the camp buzzed with a mixture of shock and indignation. Yet Miss Marple, with her keen understanding of human frailty, felt only a quiet sorrow, for she had seen such scenes before in St. Mary Mead, a moment when a hidden truth, once exposed, laid bare the heart's deepest longings. Dr. Carter's voice cut through the morning air, sharp as a blade. "You betrayed us, Malik," she said, her spectacles glinting with fury as she waved the map like an accusation. "This was my discovery, the work of years, and you thought to steal it for yourself." Her words echoed across the camp, drawing the workers' wary glances, their murmurs a low hum of disapproval. Sir Reginald, his face red with outrage, loomed beside her, his fists clenched as if ready to deliver justice himself. "Thieving scoundrel," he bellowed. "I ought to have you dragged to the city in chains." Tariq, standing apart, watched in silence, his dark eyes unreadable, but his posture tense, as if weighing the scene against some private measure. Malik, his slight frame hunched under the weight of their anger, looked small and fragile, his eyes fixed on the sand as if it might swallow him whole. Miss Marple, stepping forward with the gentle authority of a village matriarch, raised a hand for silence. "Please," she said, her voice soft but commanding, "let the boy speak. In my experience, there is always a story behind such an act, and we would do well to hear it." Her words, calm and measured, quelled the storm, and even Dr. Carter, though still bristling, lowered the map and nodded curtly. Malik's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, trembling with the weight of his confession. "I didn't mean to betray anyone," he said, his eyes still on the ground. I only wanted a chance. My family, my mother, my sisters, they live in a village where the wells are dry half the year. My father died working in a quarry, and there's no money, no way out. When I saw the map, I thought, if I could find the treasure, just a piece of it, I could give them a life, a real life. His voice broke, and tears traced paths through the dust on his cheeks. I wasn't going to keep it all. I just wanted enough to change things. Miss Marple listened, her heart heavy with recognition. In St. Mary Mead, she had known a girl who stole a silver spoon from a manor house, not for greed, but to buy medicine for her sick mother. Malik's story was different in scale, but the desperation was the same. A quiet, aching hope that drove good people to desperate acts. She noted the way Dr. Carter's expression softened, though her jaw remained tight, and the way Sir Reginald's bluster faltered, his eyes flickering with something like unease. Tariq, still silent, tilted his head, as if Malik's words had stirred a memory of his own. "You picked the lock," Miss Marple said gently, her tone free of judgment. "It was very cleverly done, Malik. The trunk showed no signs of force. How did you learn such a skill?" Her question was not an accusation, but an invitation, and Malik, sensing her kindness, lifted his gaze to meet hers. I used to fix things," he said, his voice steadier now. "In my village, we had no money for new tools, so I learned to mend what we had. Locks, hinges, anything. When I came to the dig, I saw the tools in the supply tent, wire, picks. It wasn't hard to figure out." He paused, his eyes dropping again. "I took the map that night, after dinner. I knew Dr. Carter kept the key on her chain, but I waited until she was asleep. I'm quiet, ma'am. I've always been quiet." Dr. Carter's face darkened, but before she could speak, Tariq stepped forward, his voice low but resonant. "The desert teaches us to survive," he said, his eyes on Malik. "But it also teaches us that no man walks alone. You should have spoken, Malik. There are other ways." His words carried a weight that silenced the camp, and Miss Marple noted the respect in the workers' eyes, as if Tariq's judgment carried the authority of the land itself. Sir Reginald, however, was less forgiving. "Other ways?" he scoffed. "He's a thief, plain and simple. We can't let this go unpunished. What's to stop him doing it again?" But Miss Marple saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, as if his own ambition recognized a shadow of itself in Malik's act. She stepped closer, her presence calming the rising tension. "Punishment is one path," she said, her voice as gentle as a breeze, "but understanding is another. In my village, we once had a boy who stole apples from an orchard. He wasn't bad, only desperate. We gave him work, and he became the best gardener we ever had. Malik has skills, and a heart that meant no harm. Perhaps there's a way forward that benefits us all." Her words, simple but profound, hung in the air, and the camp fell silent, considering. Dr. Carter, her anger cooling, looked at the map in her hands, then at Malik. "You've cost us time and trust," she said, her voice firm but less harsh. "But Miss Marple's right. There's a story here, and I'd rather not see you ruined for it. You'll work to earn back our trust, starting today." Malik nodded, his eyes brimming with gratitude and shame. Tariq, his expression softening, placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. "The desert forgives," he said quietly, "but it does not forget. Work hard, and you'll find your place." Sir Reginald, still grumbling, muttered something about leniency breeding trouble, but he did not press the matter, perhaps sensing the camp's mood shifting toward mercy. Miss Marple, watching the scene unfold, felt a quiet satisfaction. The map was recovered, the thief revealed, but the true victory, she knew, was in understanding the why behind the act. She thought of St. Mary Mead, where small acts of kindness had often mended broken lives, and she hoped the same might happen here. People, she murmured to herself, her knitting needles resuming their rhythm, are so often saved by the chance to make amends. Chapter 10. The Map Restored. The desert sun climbed steadily, casting a harsh light over the encampment as the dust of Malik's confession settled. Miss Jane Marple stood at the camp's edge, her shawl draped lightly over her shoulders, her eyes tracing the horizon where the dunes met the sky in a shimmering haze. The return of the treasure map had lifted a weight from the expedition, but the air still hummed with the aftershocks of betrayal, like ripples in a pond disturbed by a stone. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple had seen how truth, once uncovered, could mend or break a community, and she watched now to see which path this camp would take. Her knitting lay folded in her tent, for her hands were still, her mind weaving the final threads of the mystery into place. Dr. Evelyn Carter, clutching the recovered map, stood before her tent, her face a study in conflicting emotions, relief at the map's return, anger at Malik's deception, and a flicker of doubt about her own vigilance. She spread the parchment on her work table, her hands smoothing its edges with a care that bordered on reverence. "We've lost time," she said to the gathered team, her voice steady but edged with resolve. "But the map is back, and we'll proceed. I'll double the guard on my tent tonight. No more mistakes." Her eyes flicked to Malik, who stood at the group's edge, his head bowed, and Miss Marple noted, the softening in her gaze, a sign that mercy had begun to temper her fury. Sir Reginald Harrow, his bluster subdued by the morning's events, paced near the campfire, his cigar unlit, his hands clasped behind his back. "Well, Carter, you've got your precious map," he said, his tone gruff but lacking its usual fire. "Let's get on with it, then. I didn't fund this dig to stand about navel-gazing." Yet Miss Marple saw a change in him, a chastened air, as if Malik's confession had mirrored his own hunger for glory. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Squire, who, after a public misstep, had quietly donated to the church to restore his standing. Sir Reginald, she suspected, might seek a similar redemption. Tariq, ever the enigma, stood apart, his dark eyes scanning the dunes as if reading their secrets. He had spoken little since Malik's confession, but his words of mercy had carried weight, and the workers now looked to him with renewed respect. Miss Marple watched as he approached Malik, speaking softly in their shared tongue, his hand resting briefly on the young man's shoulder. The gesture was fleeting, but it spoke of a bond forged in the desert's harsh lessons, and Miss Marple wondered if Tariq saw in Malik a younger self, driven by dreams but tempered by the land. Malik, spared from immediate punishment, returned to his trench, his shovel moving with a quiet determination. The workers, initially wary, began to include him in their tasks, their murmurs softening as the day wore on. Miss Marple, passing by, caught his eye and offered a gentle smile. "You've been given a chance, my dear," she said softly. "In my village, we say a mistake. Mended is a lesson learned. Work well, and you'll find your place. Malik nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears, and resumed his digging. His hands steady, but his heart, Miss Marple knew, still heavy with the weight of his choice. The camp, reinvigorated by the map's return, buzzed with renewed purpose. Dr. Carter plotted the next phase of the dig, her charts spread across the table like a battle plan. Tariq led a small team to scout the ruins indicated on the map, his knowledge of the desert guiding their steps. Sir Reginald, after a long conference with his assistant Perkins, emerged with a surprising announcement. The treasure, if found, would be donated to a museum, a gesture he framed as a gift to posterity. Miss Marple, overhearing, raised an eyebrow, sensing in his words a bid to salvage his reputation. Glory, she thought, takes many forms, but it's rarely selfless. As evening fell, the camp gathered for a simple meal, the tension of the past days easing like a knot slowly undone. Dr. Carter, though still guarded, spoke of the ruins with a spark of her old passion, her voice carrying over the crackle of the fire. Tariq shared a tale of the desert kings, his words weaving a spell that hushed even Sir Reginald's grumbling. Malik, seated at the group's edge, listened in silence, his presence a quiet testament to the camp's fragile forgiveness. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, observed them all, her mind tracing the patterns of human nature that played out here as surely as in her village. The map, now locked in a new, sturdier box, lay at the heart of the camp's renewed hope. But Miss Marple knew that its true significance lay in what it had revealed about those who sought it. Dr. Carter's pride, Tariq's heritage, Sir Reginald's ambition, Malik's desperation, each had been laid bare by the theft, and each had found a way to move forward. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead widow, who, after a theft in her home, had rebuilt her trust through small acts of kindness. Here, in the desert, the same principle held. Redemption was not in the treasure, but in the choices made in its shadow. As the stars emerged, Miss Marple retired to her tent. Her knitting resumed at last. The camp's lanterns glowed softly, and the desert stretched beyond, vast and indifferent. The map was restored, the thief unmasked, but Miss Marple's work, she knew, was done. The treasure awaited, but it was the human heart, with its flaws and hopes, that held her interest. Truth, she murmured, her needles clicking in the quiet, is the greatest find of all. Chapter 11. Reflections by the Fire. The desert night wrapped the encampment in a cool embrace, its vast darkness punctuated by the warm flicker of the campfire, which cast dancing shadows across the sand. Miss Jane Marple sat on a low stool near the flames, her shawl draped loosely over her shoulders, her knitting needles moving with their familiar, soothing rhythm. The return of the treasure map had restored a fragile peace to the camp, but the air still carried the weight of recent revelations, like the faint echo of a storm that had passed. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple had often found that the aftermath of a solved mystery was as revealing as the mystery itself, and tonight, as the camp gathered around the fire, she watched for the truths that lingered in glances and silences. The team sat in a loose circle, their faces softened by the firelight. Dr. Evelyn Carter, her spectacles reflecting the flames, clutched her notebook, though her fingers were still, her usual intensity tempered by the day's events. Sir Reginald Harrow, his cigar glowing like a tiny beacon, spoke in low tones to his assistant. Perkins, his bluster replaced by a quieter resolve. Tariq, seated cross-legged on the sand, gazed into the fire, his expression as enigmatic as the desert itself. Malik, at the circle's edge, kept his eyes on his hands, his presence tentative but accepted, a silent testament to the camp's grudging mercy. The workers, scattered in small groups, murmured among themselves, their voices a soft counterpoint to the crackle of the fire. Miss Marple, her knitting a pretext for observation, let her gaze drift from one face to another. Each had played a part in the drama of the stolen map, and each, she knew, had been shaped by it. Dr. Carter's pride, so fiercely guarded, had been tested by the theft, revealing a vulnerability she masked with her meticulous control. Tariq's reverence for the desert's history had guided his call for mercy, a choice that spoke of a man who valued legacy over vengeance. Sir Reginald's ambition, once a roaring flame, had flickered in the face of Malik's confession, hinting at a humility he might never admit. And Malik, with his quiet desperation, had laid bare a dream that echoed the hopes of countless others Miss Marple had known in her village. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Theft, years ago, when a boy had taken apples from an orchard, not for hunger, but to prove his worth to a world that overlooked him. The village had rallied, offering him work rather than blame, and he had grown into a man of quiet strength. Here, in the desert, Malik's story was not so different. A young man driven by a dream of escape, caught by his own daring, and now offered a chance to rebuild. Miss Marple's needles paused as she considered the parallels, her lips curving in a faint smile. "Human nature," she said softly, her voice lost in the fire's crackle, "is the same everywhere, whether under an English sky or a desert star." Tariq, sitting across the fire, caught her words and looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers. "You see much, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low but clear. "The desert hides nothing from those who know how to look." His tone held a note of respect, and Miss Marple inclined her head, her smile widening. "Oh, I'm just an old woman with too much time to think," she replied, her needles resuming their dance. "But I find that people, like your desert, leave traces of their truths. Malik, for instance, he reminds me of a boy I knew, who stole not for greed, but for hope. It's a powerful thing, hope, don't you think?" Her question was gentle, but it carried a weight that made Tariq nod, his gaze returning to the fire, as if seeing his own reflections in its glow. Dr. Carter, overhearing, set her notebook aside and joined the conversation, her voice softer than usual. "Hope can be dangerous," she said, her eyes on Malik, who sat silently at the circle's edge. "But it can also be a guide. I was angry, Miss Marple, but you were right to urge us to listen. Malik's mistake doesn't erase his skill. We'll need him in the days ahead." Her words, though measured, carried a warmth that surprised the group, and Miss Marple noted the way Malik's shoulders straightened, as if a burden had lifted. Sir Reginald, puffing on his cigar, grunted in agreement. "Boy's got talent," he said grudgingly. "But he'd better not try anything like that again, or I'll have him carted off myself." His tone was gruff, but Miss Marple saw a flicker of admiration in his eyes, as if he recognized in Malik a spark of the daring he prized in himself. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Merchant, who, after a scandal, had won back the village's trust with a generous act. Sir Reginald's pledge to donate the treasure, she suspected, was his own attempt at such redemption. The fire dwindled, its embers glowing like secrets in the sand. Tariq rose, his silhouette stark against the night, and spoke of the ruins they would explore. Come morning, his words weaving a tale of ancient kings and hidden paths. The camp listened, spellbound, and Miss Marple felt the weight of the desert's history settle over them, a reminder that their small drama was but a moment in its vast story. Malik, emboldened by the group's acceptance, ventured a quiet question about the ruins, and Tariq answered with a patience that sealed the young man's place among them. As the gathering dispersed, Miss Marple remained by the fire, her knitting a quiet companion. The map was restored, the thief unmasked, and the camp's wounds were beginning to heal. Yet she knew that the true treasure lay not in gold or relics, but in the fragile bonds forged in the face of betrayal. People, she murmured, her needles clicking softly, are always more complex than their secrets, and that is what makes them worth understanding. Chapter 12. The Journey Home. The desert morning dawned with a clarity that seemed to sharpen the edges of the world, the sun rising over the dunes in a blaze of gold that promised both heat and hope. Miss Jane Marple stood beside her packed tent, her modest suitcase at her feet, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders as she prepared to depart the encampment. The stolen map, now safely restored to Dr. Carter's care, had left its mark on the expedition, but the camp buzzed with renewed purpose, the air alive with the clatter of tools and the murmur of plans. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple had often found that the resolution of a mystery brought a quiet renewal, and here, in this vast and unforgiving landscape, she saw the same truth unfolding. Her knitting, tucked into her bag, was a silent companion, its work done as surely as her own. The camp was already stirring as she made her way to the dusty jeep that would carry her to the nearest outpost, where a train awaited to begin her long journey back to England. Dr. Evelyn Carter, her face softened by the morning's promise, approached with the map carefully folded in her hands. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice steady but warm, "we owe you a great deal. Your trap was clever, and your wisdom, well, it's given us a chance to move forward. I hope you'll visit again when we find the treasure." Her eyes held a spark of gratitude, and Miss Marple smiled, noting the archaeologist's newfound openness, a crack in her armor of precision. "You're very kind, my dear," Miss Marple replied, her tone as gentle as a village breeze. "But I suspect you'll manage splendidly without me. The desert, like my village, has a way of teaching its own lessons." She glanced at the map, its edges curling slightly in Dr. Carter's grip, and thought of the secrets it still held, secrets that belonged to the future, not to her. Sir Reginald Harrow, his usual bluster tempered by the week's events, strode over, his hat tilted at a jaunty angle. "Miss Marple, you're a marvel," he declared, his voice carrying across the camp. "Never thought an old lady with knitting needles could outsmart a thief, but you've proved me wrong. If you're ever in London, my club's doors are open." His offer was genuine, if grandiose, and Miss Marple saw in his eyes a flicker of humility, a rare concession for a man so driven by glory. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead's squire, whose pride had softened after a public misstep, and she nodded graciously, her smile disarming. "Thank you, Sir Reginald," she said, "but I'm rather fond of my quiet village. Still, I'll remember your kindness." She noted his pledge to donate the treasure, a gesture that, while self-serving, spoke of a man learning to look beyond himself. Tariq, approaching with his quiet grace, offered a respectful nod. "The desert will remember you, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low and resonant. You see what others miss, like the tracks of a fox in the sand." His words carried the weight of his heritage, and Miss Marple sensed in them a rare acknowledgment, as if the desert itself spoke through him. She thought of his call for mercy toward Malik, a choice that had steadied the camp, and she inclined her head, her eyes meeting his. "You've been a fine guide, Tariq," she said, "not just for the dunes, but for the heart of this place. Keep your stories safe." Her words were simple, but they carried a warmth that made Tariq's lips curve in a faint smile, a rare break in his stoic demeanor. Malik, standing at a distance, hesitated before approaching, his hands clasped nervously. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry for what I did. You gave me a chance, and I won't forget it." His eyes, once shadowed by fear, held a glimmer of resolve, and Miss Marple saw in him the same potential she had seen in a St. Mary Mead boy who had turned from theft to purpose. She reached out, her hand light on his arm. "You've a good heart, Malik," she said softly. "Use it well, and the desert will reward you." He nodded, his gratitude silent but profound, and returned to his work, his shovel moving with a steadiness that spoke of a burden lifted. As the Jeep's engine sputtered to life, Miss Marple took a final look at the camp. Dr. Carter was already at her table, plotting the next dig with her meticulous care. Tariq led a team toward the ruins, his figure blending into the dunes. Sir Reginald's voice carried faintly, organizing supplies with a new-found restraint. Malik's shovel flashed in the sunlight, a small but steady part of the camp's rhythm. The treasure, still hidden, awaited its moment, but Miss Marple knew that the true discovery lay in the hearts she had helped uncover. She climbed into the Jeep, her suitcase stowed beside her, and as it rumbled across the sand, she let her thoughts drift to St. Mary Mead. The desert, with its vast silences and hidden truths, was not so different from her village, where secrets lurked in quiet cottages and behind polite smiles. "People," she murmured, her knitting needles clicking once more as she drew them from her bag, "are always so very predictable, and yet so very surprising." The Jeep carried her toward the horizon, and Miss Marple smiled, already anticipating the next puzzle life would bring.